All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Snowed in Cinema. This is the final film program of the year. Kind of a low-key one for us to do. Just talking about movies that take place in the snow, in the cold, to prepare us New Englanders for what's coming. Although usually that starts in January at this point, right, Todd?
January, maybe February, depending on the year.
Yeah, we don't really get snow that much in December, which I mean, I'll considering I'm busy, we're busy, I'll take it. But again, going to be kind of low key. Some programs coming up though. In January, we're going to be doing a year-end recap of the films and the film news of 2023. So not only are we going to talk about our favorite pictures of the past year, but we're going to talk about some of the big stories. Disney not having a very good year, franchise fatigue as a whole, with a few exceptions, kind of hitting the industry. And of course, we're going to talk about the strikes and a little doll called Barbie. I mean, how can we not talk? And how can we not talk about Barbenheimer? So that is going to be our next program, and that is going to be on January. Let me double check the date. January 8th. So we'll see you there, but we're going to get started with our program right now. I don't know what this isn't moving up for me. One sec. Go back. All right, Snowed in Cinema. Here we go. All right. So, why winter? I mean, it's a good plot device if you're talking about certain stories and if you want certain things to happen. So, winter is kind of a built-in plot device for two things: atmosphere and obstacles. So, winter gives you a lot more of an atmosphere than I think summer does, in my opinion. Summer is just hot and sweaty, whereas winter has this cold. It has this built-in isolation, as we can see here. So you might not be able to get away as easily. So for some of the programs we have, it's going to be, well, why can't they simply just leave? Well, because it's snowing outside and you don't have all of the God, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't have everything you need to just be able to walk out of a hotel when your husband's going crazy. And again, as I say here, I feel like it looks a lot nicer than summer. I am just not a summer fan. I think it looks gross, and it's my least favorite season. So the first film we're going to discuss is the one I just alluded to, which is probably, I think, the ultimate snowed-in movie, which is Stephen King's The Shining. Now, this is the Stanley Kubrick version. And Todd, if you'd like to give a quick rundown on Stephen King's relationship with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
So this is one of those things that's it's been a subject of a lot of speculation and infamy. Long story short, King respects the movie as a movie. As an adaptation, he is not a fan because Kubrick takes the very basic idea and he does what he often did, which was he very much runs in his own direction with it. His version of Jack is more openly aggressive and arguably much more openly abusive. There's the implication he was always just this guy, whereas King's story, it's much more about this ultimately good man broken by alcohol and pressure.
Yeah. But I mean, I might be committing heresy here. I think this film is a lot stronger than the book. If you were to ask me what version of The Shining I really enjoy, it's this one. I mean, hey, I can see how a 1970s Shelley Duvall could get charmed by 1970s Jack Nicholson and then be like, oh, he turned out like this.
Well, personally, I'm at the camp of they're two different animals, and I judge them as such. Although I will say, movie-wise, this beats the crap out of the Mick Garris adaptation.
All due respect to Mick Garris, but yes, The Shining is probably the ultimate snowed-in film because it takes place all over winter and in Colorado. So if you're not familiar with the story, Jack Torrance is a struggling writer who has recently gotten sober. He agrees to be the caretaker of a hotel for the winter and decides to take his wife and young child there. Turns out, I mean, the hotel's haunted. There's ghosts. A whole lot of bad stuff happened in there. In the book, there's shrub animals that move, and thankfully Kubrick was like, yeah, we're not doing that. But the finale of the film, the final act, takes place during a brutal snowstorm in which you can't really leave unless you have the snowcat. And that is right around the time where Jack Torrance goes crazy and tries to murder his wife and son. So it's again, it has that built-in isolation, but it also, the fact that it's snowed in, that you can't really leave, it adds to this kind of terror that you have. It's this idea of, okay, not only am I trapped with someone, I'm trapped and the outside elements could kill me as well. Luckily, if you've seen the film, there is something that allows both Shelley Duvall and her young son to escape. But it is ultimately the idea of being trapped with a monster that makes The Shining so terrifying. It's not the ghosts. It's not the idea that this, bad things happened at this hotel. You remove any supernatural aspect of this movie, it's a woman and her son trapped with her abusive husband who recently started drinking again after getting sober and is taking out all of his frustrations on them. But it's definitely, I would say, the ultimate Snowden movie. And I would recommend the sequel that we had, which was 2019's Dr. Sleep, which acts as both a sequel, an adaptation of the book, and a sequel to the Stanley Kubrick film. It does that balancing act very well.
Yeah, for where the film and the book differ wildly for The Shining, the film kind of tries to reconcile that difference overall pretty effectively.
Oh, yeah. Not as much snow in Dr. Sleep, though, so did not include it. Moving on to, I would say, if we had to pick two, the two best Snowden movies, the other is John Carpenter's The Thing, a film that was not appreciated in 1982 when it came out, but found second life on VHS shelves. This is why local video stores were important, and this is why you can't just rely on streaming. It's similar to The Shining, where it's okay, there's something bad in the building, but oh no, it's bad outside. And with The Thing, there is the added threat of the snow could help the thing survive. At one point in the film, McCready, who's Kurt Russell's character, says the thing wants to freeze. The thing wants to go back to sleep and then to be buried and then found again and infect more people. So the remaining survivors of Outpost 31 essentially realize we have to burn this place down. No one can get out alive, including ourselves, because as you find out in this film, you don't know you're infected until the very end. And it's based on this great short story called Who Goes There? I'd highly recommend reading it. And it is inspired by, but not a direct adaptation of, an earlier film called The Thing from Another World. They're both adapting the same story. John Carpenter's is a lot more faithful. And also, if you love good creature and gore effects, you can't beat Rob Bottin's work in this. It's so good. And if I had the money, I would buy some of these props and keep them in my house. Let's say, Todd, any comments? We certainly watch this every winter, whenever there's a snow day, really.
I mean, in a weird way, the isolation works as a double-edged sword, because yes, on the one hand, the thing can outlast the people, but it's also the fact that it's surrounded by so much frozen desolation is kind of what's keeping it contained. There's almost a weird quarantine aspect to the way the film plays out, where it's, again, the idea of none of us can leave, even if we wanted to, because one of us could be bringing this thing out into the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's it's not just the elements. At first they're like, we can't get out of here because it's 40 below. Who can survive that? But then, as you said, later in the film becomes, even if we could survive, if we go out into the cold, we're just going to make this thing spread to the greater population, and we can't have that. Interesting thing to watch when during the COVID outbreak. Stay inside, or else the disease can spread. It's like, huh? Oh. Sadly, not as interesting. I was gonna say, both sadly and thankfully, not as interesting and gory as The Thing.
Well,
So
yeah.
yeah, I
There
was
was
at
also there was also the, just because I know people are going to ask, there was the 2011 kind of half prequel, half remake. Honestly, can't say would recommend.
there's a reason that's not in the see also category, because that movie is kind of bad. But yeah, John Carpenter's The Thing, absolutely great. And they not shot in Antarctica. I don't think you can shoot in Antarctica, but it is shot in Alaska. And if you ever want to hear some great stories, the Shout Factory Blu-ray release has a lot of people who interview the cast, interview the crew. There were some wild stories about having to brave the elements shooting this film. So some of the actors' exasperation with the elements, that's not acting. So moving on, Todd, would you like to introduce Misery?
So we've discussed now several times the idea of winter being an isolating, hating circumstance. The idea of being trapped with people you just don't know if you can trust. People who are essentially could turn out to be a violent monster. What happens if you find yourself trapped in the middle of winter, surrounded by somebody who loves you unconditional? Oh,
Oh no. Not
this was
not that kind of loves you unconditionally.
this was adapted from a book King wrote during a phase where he was having issues with the level of fame he was in his career had taken him to, and at points just some of the more obsessed people he was dealing with. In this, James Caan plays the author of a fairly well received series of romance novels that he's looking to hang it up on and start the next section of his career. He's finished the last book in this run. He gets into an accident where he winds up being saved by this woman who declares herself to be his number one fan. Unfortunately, she gets a chance to look at how he wants to end the series, and she is not having it. She basically forces him to burn it and says, "You're going to write a new ending." And the more this plays out, the more he starts realizing, oh God, I'm trapped with a psychopath.
Yeah. And again, not only is it snowing, not only is it unsafe to go outside, he's in a car accident. He's also physically injured, which makes it even harder.
There is a scene in this movie that is, if you're at all squeamish, as soon as you hear the word hobbling, you might want to look away.
Yeah, or leave the room. I mean, although what's interesting is reading this book and watching this movie kind of predicted the kind of the overzealousness of certain fandoms. I mean,
Oh,
what we're seeing
definitely.
now with certain, like the superhero and the Star Wars fandoms, where the creators are actively just catering to the fans to keep them placated. I'm like, man, this story was ahead of its time.
Yeah, in a way, Annie Wilkes kind of predates a lot of the idea of the fandom believing they own the property, not the creators.
Yeah, no, it's again, taking death to the author to an absurd degree. And again, I'd just like to mention here, Kathy Bates won Best Actress in this film. She is, other than Joe, she's one of the two, okay, I'll say three actresses to ever win Best Actress for a horror movie. The other two being Natalie Portman for Black Swan and Jodie Foster for Silence of the Lambs. And if you're at all aware of how horror is treated by the Academy, this is a feat.
Oh yeah.
Extreme.
Also, fun fact: the three main leads of this are all they were all at least nominees. James Caan for The Godfather, Kathy Bates winning for this, and I'm pretty sure she's been nominated for something else. And Richard Farnsworth getting nominated later for The Straight Story.
Oh yeah. All right, moving on to one I showed Todd recently, a 2008 film called The Children, not to be confused with his 1980 film called The Children, which is boring. This movie rules, although they both kind of deal with the same thing, children becoming bloodthirsty psychopaths. This one's a lot more fun though. It's a lot better execution. So this a woman with her teen daughter from a previous relationship. It's hinted that the teen daughter is the result of a teen pregnancy. And her two younger children with her new husband. She goes to her sister's house with her sister's young children. It's meant to be just a nice New Year's party. but one of the kids gets sick, then the other kids get sick, and then the kids start doing disturbing things like trying to hurt other people, mainly the adults. And again, kind of, we just go back to the isolation here is really good. There is a subplot in this of the teen daughter wanting to, like, I want to get out of here and go to a party. She keeps trying to get in touch with her friend. After a while, her friend stops responding, and you never quite figure out what happened. But there's hints of like, oh, it's taking a long time for people to get here. They have to call an ambulance for a certain reason. It's like we're all busy, and it's like, how can you be busy? And that's something we see in a lot of horror movies. Us did that very recently, where there's there's a break-in, they're calling the police are like, we are swamped right now, and they're like, why? And you find out the same thing is happening all over. And aside from the winter aspect, the other scary aspect is, what do you do when children become psychopaths? Because we're almost biologically wired to not want to hurt kids. I mean, I would say not even almost. We are biologically wired. It's like, um, you know, do not. They are the genetic successors. Don't hurt them. But what do you have to do when you want to protect yourself? Especially if the very child trying to kill you is your kid. I think if you like horror and you like sort of isolation horror movies or killer kid horror movies, I think this is a great little entry. And I don't know what else the director has done, but it's an hour, 26 minutes. It's tight. There's some good kills in it. And again, it's got some good atmosphere and good tension. And some of these kids actually do bite it. Some people finally realize, yeah, I don't think I can talk sense into this child. I was about to say, oh, as I say, speaking of crappy kids, I think that might be the next slide, but Frozen, no, not that one. Todd, have you seen this one? Or am I the only
Actually, I
one
don't think
who's
I
seen it?
have. By the way, just to follow up, the director of The Children, he's mostly done a lot of television work. He has like
Okay.
one other feature film besides this.
Okay. I mean, that's the case of a lot of British directors. They just are taking work where they can get it. But this is a again, a pretty good trapped movie. So if you like films like there was one Devil where they're all trapped in an elevator, Open Water where there's a couple that was stranded while scuba diving and have to survive shark infested waters. This is good in that trapped single location genre, only this time friends get stranded on a ski lift. They bribe someone to send them up right before the it closes, and then all of a sudden, oh no, it stops. They're just in the ski lift chairs hovering above like a 50-foot drop, and that's not going to, even if you survive that, you're going to be severely injured. So it's not even snow they have to deal with. There's the cold, because it's like, all right, we're dressed for the elements, but we're dressed for skiing. When you're skiing, you're working up a sweat, you're moving, your body's staying warm. You're not dressed to be sitting in the cold at night. So there's that. Then there's wolves that come along. And again, there's just this, how do we get out of here? So I mean, again, it's short. It realizes it can't be too long on account of otherwise you get bored. But I think it's a good little thriller worth at least one watch. Now on to, speaking of horrible kids, The Lodge. Originally from 2019, although I don't think it got a major release until 2020. I think 2019 is like the festival dates.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, so I think this technically is a 2020 release. I mean, COVID made a lot of things weird. This was one of the last movies we saw in theaters before everything started to shut down.
Actually, kind of dovetailing off your earlier point, this is like Riley Keough's second kind of isolation horror film coming off of It Comes at Night.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Riley Keough's become, I think, really made a name for herself as a very good actress, and she had a good year. She had that Daisy Jones miniseries, but she's great in this. She's in Mad Max Fury Road. I think she's fantastic in the film Zola, which Zola was one of the best films of 2021 that I don't think anybody saw other than me. But this is a great little entry, and I would say if you like movies like The Shining, or if you like movies like The Children, this is a movie for you. So, Riley Coe plays a woman, Grace, who is the sole survivor of her religious cult that ended up being a suicide cult. Not quite Jonestown level. There's a lot of allusions visually to the Heaven's Gate suicide, but she was part of an explicitly Christian cult, so that is definitely separating it from Heaven's Gate. But she comes in, she meets a man who is actually what is he, a sociologist or a psychologist?
I want to say I think it was psychologist.
Yeah, who does research on cults. He met her as a subject. They struck up a relationship. I mean, that could be little dubious, but these are both people who are adults and I mean, she is at the very least seeing another therapist. She has medication, so she is of sound mind. So they've been seeing each other for a while. The father proposes to her, decides they're going to get married. His ex-wife does not take it very well and takes her own life. And that leaves the man's two children very upset and determined to basically drive this woman insane. So that is all within the first 15 minutes of this film. The main part of this film is the father takes Grace, who's Riley Coe, and his two children. They're like, oh, we're going to spend some time at a cabin. And he sees it as like, it might be a good way for you to bond with the kids and the kids to see like, Grace is a nice person. She has no ill will towards you. Maybe you shouldn't hate this woman who just wants to be, a good stepmother. But he gets called back for work. So Grace is stuck with these two horrible children who are trying to induce a mental breakdown in her. And again, it's terrifying because you wonder, there's hints of a supernatural aspect at hand, but ultimately this movie is about two kids. One is a teenager, one is like, around 10 or 11, kind of preteen?
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah. Trying to gaslight this woman into a mental breakdown. It's like Rosemary's Baby. You don't need a supernatural aspect for this to be terrifying. And I will not spoil the ending of this movie, but let's just say the kids partially succeed. But then the kids realize, oh, maybe we shouldn't push a person who has trauma into a breakdown. I believe this is what the people call messing around and finding out. And normally I'd be very disturbed, but I watched this movie and I hated those kids so much. I'm like, they're like the kids from The Witch. I'm like, ugh, fine, good.
By the way, regarding your last point, there is also a shout out to John Carpenter's The Thing in the movie.
Oh yeah, there. And again, this is a scene that kind of establishes Grace as not just a good person, but like someone who's actively trying to be a good parental figure. She's watching John Carpenter's The Thing with them. She gets to the defibrillator scene and she's just like, you know what? I don't think this is appropriate for you two to watch. I think you're too young for this. Let's find something else. I mean, granted, if I were the kid's age, I'd be like, no, I'm fine. But it's her trying to actually parent. I just feel so bad for her throughout this entire movie. I'm like, she has done literally nothing wrong, and these kids just treat her like garbage. Just again, I normally don't advocate for what happens to the kids in this movie, but I don't know. These kids are kind of terrible, and it is just a movie. So we're going up to Alaska now with vampires for 30 Days of Night. We've discussed killer kids. We've discussed just awful kids. We've discussed aliens. We've discussed axe murdering husbands, wolves in the cold. Now it's time for vampires. 30 Days of Night, which a decent-ish movie.
I will say personally,
Yeah.
the film's okay. I would recommend actually seeking out the comic. I know it is available in the library network.
Yes.
It's a quick, fairly enjoyable read with some, honestly, really great artwork.
Yeah, no, this is a movie that I think is ultimately about 30 minutes too long. I mean, in the movie it's best at the beginning when they're kind of for background, when this movie was made, it took place in Barrow, Alaska. This was made in 2007. However, now Alaska has been going through there's been a movement in Alaska to rename a lot of the towns for the indigenous names. So it's now called, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Utqiagvik. So takes place in Utqiagvik, and it is known for having a period for about a month where it is completely dark. There's no sunlight whatsoever. If you've been to our past programs, Ellie, who is sometimes one of our guest hosts, she lived there for, I think, a year when she was about 5 or 6, and she said she doesn't remember much, but she has confirmed, yep, it's dark for about a month. There's no sunlight whatsoever. And vampires say, hey, this is going to be the perfect place for a feeding frenzy because we don't have to worry about the sunlight at all. There's a lot of good setup in the movie. Just sort of when they're shutting down, people are leaving. We're meeting the few people who are sticking behind. Ben Foster plays a weird guy saying you're not prepared for what's coming. And any scenes with the vampires are actually really great. Danny Houston is fantastic as the vampire ringleader. But I mean, your other lead is Josh Hartnett, and as good as he is in Oppenheimer, I don't think the man's a lead actor. At least he wasn't fit for it in this movie. But it's definitely worth your time if this is what you like. Speaking of vampires, we're going over to, is this Norway?
I think so. Let me double
Yeah.
check on that, actually. I mean, feel free to keep talking while I check.
The vampire film, Let the Right One In, a great little movie. Was remade here, don't bother.
Swedish.
Oh, Swedish, okay. It's some place where they're all blonde and it's cold a lot. But yeah, Swedish, definitely kind of had got a cult following in like 2008, 2009. This came out sort of right around the time Twilight was getting big. So it kind of fulfilled a lot of horror fans' need for a vampire movie that was good and actually kind of bloodthirsty versus a romance. I mean, there's room for both. Just Twilight's not good at all at anything it's trying to do, but I digress.
I mean, it's funny, just it's not trying to be.
Yeah, that first movie is a great unintentional comedy. If you watch it that way, it's a hoot. But it is about a young boy named Oscar. He's kind of an outcast at school. He's bullied by kids, even when he goes swimming. Ooh, put a pin in that. That comes back later in the movie. And he meets a new next door neighbor named Ellie. And she doesn't come out during the daytime. She only comes out at night. She hangs out outside. She seems to have a real tolerance for cold. And she lives with an older man. And at first you wonder, like, what is this? And then you realize she's not being victimized by the old man. The old man is working for her. And I will leave it there. It's also a really beautifully shot film. I feel like sometimes when we get into horror movies, and there's a place for the stuff that's made for $5 and doesn't look great, but I always love it when you get a person making a horror movie who has an eye for cinematography, has an eye for score, has an eye for atmosphere. And this is a film that has all three. Again, one of the final scenes takes place in a pool. And the way that what happens is shot and the perspective that the director takes it's almost funny. It's horrifying as well, but it's also just a really genius way to shoot what happened versus I think a lesser director would just let us see the bloodbath, as it were. And now this is the movie we might talk about the most. This is, as much as I love Let the Right One In, as much as I love The Shining, and as much as I love The Thing, this might be our recommendation of the program. Initially made in 2013. I don't think it really got a big US release date until 2014. Released by the Weinstein Company. I mean, we all know Harvey Weinstein did. There are some great stories about this because Harvey Weinstein, he's known for a lot of his monstrous deeds, but on a lesser scale of horrible things he does. He was well known for acquiring foreign films and then chopping them up in the editing room. So Bong Joon-ho talked about a number of times he lied to Harvey Weinstein about why something was in the film, and then just said, "Oh no, that wasn't true. I just told him that's who'd keep it in." So Bong Joon-ho, if you're not, Forever a King, if you're not familiar with him, he directed the 2019 film and Best Picture winner Parasite, the first foreign language film to ever win Best Picture. He's directed a lot of great movies: Memories of Murder, The Host, Mother, Okja. Great director. One of, I'd say, the best directors working today, and one of the most class conscious directors working today as well. I've talked about this in other programs, that in America, class is not really discussed in film. We're just getting to the point where we're starting to explore it. Bong Joon-ho is South Korean, and he explores class differences in a lot of his work. And Snowpiercer, despite the action science fiction setting, is no different. So the setting of Snowpiercer is humans tried to tame global warming by just doing a quick fix, and that ended up making it worse and triggering a new ice age. It's like, so the only survivors of Earth are now in this train that was built by this crazy billionaire who wanted to have a train that went around the world. So there is an upper class and there is a lower class, and those are the people at the back of the train. And when this film was advertised in the United States, it was advertised with that tagline, "Fight your way to the front." And you think it is going to be a simple, the poor underclass fights their way through the rich to take control of the train. Not to give too much away, that is the plot for a good amount of the movie. And then the final third of the film happens, the final act, and it gets into a larger discussion of maybe the system as a whole needs to change. Maybe we shouldn't have the train at all. And there are hints throughout this film that the Earth is starting to warm up a bit, that maybe people can actually survive outside. It is a great film. Chris Evans is in it. He made this between the two Captain America movies. Great Ed Harris performance. Song Kang-ho, who was in Parasite, is in this. Octavia Spencer's in it.
John
Tilda
Hurts.
Swinton.
Actually,
go on. Sorry.
as I'd say, per the comment about like how the film addresses class, Tilda Swinton's character is kind of a perfect example. As she kind of serves as almost this evangelist for the hierarchical system of the train. Her first big scene is basically, she is literally preaching to these people about the importance of, we need an upper class and a lower class.
Yes.
This is how we keep things moving.
Know your place and keep your place is an actual line from the film. So again, the way Snow works in here, it's really mostly a plot device. Again, the threat is outside. We have to stay in here. But if we're looking at this through the lens of class, you could look at the snow as just the unknown, the fear of a completely new system, or throwing away the hierarchy at all. The snow is not only a place is something that keeps people in the train, it is something that keeps the hierarchy in place. And again, I think it's a brilliant
There's actually a beat earlier in the film where they kind of discuss it is a failed earlier movement called the Revolt of the Seven, and it's that idea of trying to use a past failure to maintain the current structure.
Yeah. Like we can't have it this way. It didn't work before. Therefore we should try nothing new ever. Again, it's a brilliant movie. We do have it here. I love this film a lot. Also, it is an action film, and there are some great action set pieces in here. So if you're looking for that, you're going to get that too. But you're definitely getting an action movie that has a lot more on its mind than just great action sequences. Speaking of snow movies that tackle climate change, Snowpiercer kind of has this idea of humans ignored climate change for so long that by the time it got bad, they're like, oh no, let's not make any actual real changes. Let's just try to, I don't know, release some gas into the atmosphere. Let's try to do a quick fix, and that bites them. And again, very telling commentary on how people ultimately don't, certain systems don't want to change. They'd rather fix things quickly than actually really work to have an overhaul. And then there's The Day After Tomorrow, which is, hey guys, global warming's bad and it's going to freeze New York City. And I mean no real ill will towards this film. I love it personally. It's one of those big dumb disaster movies that I just I love to watch, hook into my veins. If Roland Emmerich is blowing up a city or destroying it in some way, I'm there. I paid money to see Moonfall, for heaven's sake. That's how devoted I am to this. But if you're looking at it as a accurate depiction of climate change or what climate change could do, not really. Yeah, climate change is not going to be a flash freeze of New York City. But it does have some good action sequences. The part where the wave is just hitting New York is pretty great. Unfortunately, I do think if we're just looking at it from a pacing excitement standpoint, after that, the movie does lag a bit. I think they got like it doesn't have the fun of Independence Day that just maintains that you're just interested to keep watching, and that might be because the cast is also not as engaging, despite the fact that
Emmerich in general, it seems like Independence Day is such a lightning in a bottle for him. He has never been able to get right since.
didn't have Will Smith, that's why. I mean, and yeah, it's there are some good set pieces in there. There is also I know a couple of people friends who are not big fans of the monarchy, so that scene where the royal family, the helicopter crashes and they freeze to death, I was like, I know a few people who were like, huh, well, glad they included that. But yeah, if you want a disaster movie, this is what you're gonna get, and it's great. It's definitely one I have in my snow rotation. But again, if you're looking for any kind of commentary like you're gonna get in Snowpiercer, don't look here. It tries for commentary. It tries and it fails. Also, there's this whole subplot of like, who is it? Juliana Margulies? But she plays a nurse and she's like reading a storybook to a sick kid.
I want to say I think it was Sayla Ward, actually. Let me take a
Okay, I mean, a brunette actress who I think was on TV mostly. But yeah, there's that whole subplot. It's a big dumb action movie, and just
Wait,
looking at what?
Sorry, I just found out that they adapted this from a book by Art Bell.
Oh, that's right. So, all
and
right,
yes, it was Sayla Ward.
yes. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Art Bell, he used to host Coast to Coast, or he might still host it. I don't know if it's him or George Norrie. Art Bell's a conspiracy theorist, and yeah, I think they took the very general idea of his book and adapted it into this. Again, this is not a serious movie. Do not see it as such, but it's a fun watch. Actually, coming to a great movie here. I'm a huge Tarantino fan, and much like stuff like Frozen, I like sort of a bottle episode type of movie. Bottle episodes are one thing to pull off on television where you have 30 minutes to an hour. Bottle episodes are a lot harder to pull off and maintain that sense of tension and that sense of excitement if you're in a full-length feature movie, especially The Hateful Eight, which, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, is close to 3 hours long.
Give or take, I mean, the version we saw was like the road show, so they also had the intermission in the middle, so that added to the runtime.
But this shows that, yes, you can still make a bottle episode movie very compelling. It is basically a bunch of rogues meeting at a remote cabin, which, during a snowstorm, the cabin is there specifically kind of to be a place where people can take shelter if they need to. So it's this post-Civil War. Samuel L. Jackson plays a Union veteran. Kurt Russell plays a bounty hunter. Jennifer Jason Leigh is the person he is taking in to collect the bounty. They go into the shelter. They meet a whole lot of characters, some of whom they're connected to in the past, and you don't know quite who they're connected to. But it's a great little movie. I don't want to spoil too much here because it's also extremely well cast. So you are watching very good actors. Walton Goggins is also in this. Isn't also Todd Bruce Dern?
Yep. Actually, I will say, I think this movie was the first time I ever really saw Walton Goggins in like a major role, and I'm like, okay, now I get it. This guy is good.
Yeah. Oh, right here on the cast list. Michael Madsen's here. Bruce Dern is here. You see a little bit of Zoe Bell, who is the stunt woman for Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. She's a Tarantino regular as well. But a lot of these just really good actors firing off of each other. And this is where the excitement comes in. It's not from the action. It's the characters interacting with each other. And also, you're just going to watch this movie and just continue to be disappointed at how underutilized Jennifer Jason Leigh is by Hollywood.
Well-deserved Oscar nomination for this.
Absolutely. Should have won, in my opinion. Should have won. So, not quite snow, but we're going to the ice storm, which is I've lived in Connecticut. I lived in Stanford for a bit. If you've ever been to New Canaan, this movie's a very accurate depiction of that area. But it is two Connecticut families. They're from the wealthy suburb of New Canaan, and it's in the 1970s, dealing with, oh no, drugs. The kids are growing up and changing social mores. And the ice storm functions more as not quite a MacGuffin, but it's something that's happening over the weekend, but you don't quite see how it plays into the film until the very end. And it's almost cruel how it plays into everything. Again, this is another one where I don't want to discuss too much on account of, I think so much of the reason the movie has an impact on people is what happens at the end. But great performances by Kevin Kline, Sigourney Weaver, Joan Allen, and it's Ang Lee as well, which I know a lot of people know Ang Lee for stuff like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but Ang Lee is a fantastic dramatic director as well. I mean, if you saw Brokeback Mountain, you'd know that, but he is someone I think one of the reasons Crouching Tiger was a success with so many people was it wasn't just a great action film. Again, there were characters you cared about, and the actors could actually act. So, and you kind of see that here. I think with the lesser director, we would have a movie where it's like, why do I care about these rich, privileged jerks? Versus Ang Lee is able to draw the humanity out of them. And by the time the movie ends, you kind of feel that same horror and emptiness that they do. So speaking of a movie that takes place in the winter and is very localized, again, you may not think that Rich Connecticut Suburbs is a very localized movie that has a very distinct feel, but oh boy, it does. But we're going to Fargo, which Minnesota. I kind of wish we had Ellie here because she can actually do that accent pretty well because she lived in Alaska for the first 12 years of her life, and they, for whatever reason, have the Minnesota voice.
Yeah.
They do. She's talked about that. She's like, yeah, it's not a joke. But this is directed by the Coen brothers, and this is, despite the Coen brothers having made like films for 11 years at this point, this was their true breakout moment. But this is Marge Gunderson, a tough, she's a tough cop, but she's not an abusive cop. She's just someone who does stuff by the book. She's in her seventh month of pregnancy. She starts to realize, hey, there's something weird with this supposed crime case I'm following, and ends up basically saving the day. But in true Coen brothers fashion, it doesn't exactly end good for everybody, and there's a whole lot of black comedy.
I mean, it's one thing the Coens have had going since as far back as Blood Simple is the idea that there is no such thing as a perfect plan.
Yeah, no, but again, you have it in Fargo. It like visually, it works really well. Like you've got just so many shots of like this open Midwest, like northern Midwest country where it's all flat. There's no mountains. A lot of like, with Antarctica, there's mountains. With Colorado and The Shining, there's mountains. There's woods in The Children. Fargo, it's just open land as far as you can see, covered in snow. But it's a great little film. And again, if you want a movie that takes place in the winter, in the snow, that's got a little bit of a bite to it, but isn't like a horror movie or extremely depressing, Fargo is the movie for you. All right, now we're getting to the real comedy of this, which is weird that this is the comedy, but I swear to you it is. So, if anyone saw the film Triangle of Sadness last year, you might recognize the name Ruben Östlund. So he was is he Swedish?
I believe so. Let me double check that while we're
Or is he
rolling.
Danish?
Uh,
But this is a family comedy where
that's Swedish.
oh, he is Swedish. Okay. So it's a family comedy, but it's not like a National Lampoon's Vacation. It would be National Lampoon's Vacation if Clark Griswold, because here's the thing. If we're talking the National Lampoon Vacation movies, Clark Griswold, for all of his faults, does love his family and will kind of go the mile for them. There is that scene in Vacation where he's like, okay, you two stay with the car. My son and I, we're going to go walk and find help. And he's actually trying to go find help. Force majeure is if Clark Griswold decided to just ditch his family when the car crashed in the desert. If I can summarize this film, I'm going to use the summary from We Hate Movies as he described it in this fake conversation. You nearly abandoned us during an avalanche. Oh, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. You grabbed your iPhone and ran, and now this family is ruined. And that is what happens in this movie. Family's on a vacation. They're out having breakfast. They think they see an avalanche. And rather than trying to bring his family with him or shelter or do anything, the father grabs his iPhone and just runs away. And then when it turns out the avalanche is nothing, they're left with this for the rest of the movie of just like so you just ran, huh? And again, it's a comedy, and it's similar to, we just saw Anatomy of a Fall a month or so back, where as the film goes on, as funny as it is, you start to kind of peel away the layers of this family and the two adults. But it's definitely, again, might be the most lighthearted movie I'm recommending in this program, which is odd. And it was remade as Downhill in 2020. No need to watch that. I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Will Ferrell, but from everything I've heard, that movie does not capture how good this film is. So I think we were all wondering, when are we going to get to Frozen? Especially because I referenced earlier, no, not that one. But yes, Frozen, the Disney movie that was inescapable from 2013 to 2014. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing Let It Go. And I'm going to say this, for as much as I rag on Disney a lot, and again, this movie was inescapable, I actually think the movie is quite good. So if you haven't seen it, two orphan sisters, Elsa and Anna. Elsa is the older sister. She has ice powers. She's essentially an X-Men. Todd, which one is the X-Men that has ice powers?
I mean, it's literally, his name is Iceman, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Ugh, so I don't read comics anymore.
I mean, unless you want to make the case for Storm.
Storm does weather, Todd, and Storm actually has a cool name, unlike Iceman.
But that still also applies to snow and ice, just saying.
I'm going to disagree with you there, but we don't have time to suss this out. So she has the power to, anything she touches, she can turn to ice. And she has always been told by her parents to kind of keep that thing hidden. You could hurt someone with it. And once her powers are exposed, she kind of decides, like, to heck with this. I'm going to go build my own kingdom and my own ice castle, and to heck with all of you who think I'm a freak. Only turns out she's dooming the kingdom to an eternal winter, which honestly, eternal winter sounds great as long as I don't have summer. But the thing that sets this film apart, and this kind of signaled a new era for Disney, was rather than romance being the centerpiece of this movie, and it's not as if Disney hadn't done that before. There was The Lion King, which didn't really have much romance in it, and Mulan, which was definitely not about the romance as much as it was Mulan trying to save China and, bring her family honor. But the idea of two actual princesses, really the romance being something on the back burner for them. The relationship between the two of them is the most important thing. And actually, one of the things the movie does really well is it brings the handsome prince, and it turns out like, oh no, the handsome prince actually isn't great. And one of the sisters decides like, yeah, you know what? I want my sister more than I want to have a nice boyfriend. And it's also, I think, from an animation standpoint, beautifully animated. Again, if you like the winter settings, if you find winter to be not just cozy, but beautiful, the animation in this movie finds and really captures the beauty of winter, or at least in my opinion. All right, I feel like I couldn't even though it's not the full movie, I feel like I couldn't let this program go without mentioning The Empire Strikes Back. I mean, I'm a Star Wars fan too, at least the first 3 movies. Kind of getting burned. I mean, my Star Wars program, I discussed this earlier. I'm burned out on Star Wars now. There's too much of it. There are too many Star Wars TV shows. Please cancel 3. But The Empire Strikes Back has a great first act on the ice planet of Hoth. With the AT-ATs, or Todd, is it AT-ATs or AT-ATs? I've always heard AT-ATs.
I have heard both used, honestly. I don't know if there's an official.
I don't think, who cares? It's a movie with people who fight with space lasers. But great first act. There's a good battle on the planet Hoth. And then there is oft parodied scene where Luke goes off with the Tauntaun, gets caught in a windstorm. Han Solo has to go save him, and that iconic line, and I thought they smelled bad on the outside. I mean, really, that is the only reason I'm including this, because that scene I have seen parodied in so many things. And apparently it's also true where if you're really in a bind in the winter and you can find an animal, it's better than the other option. But yeah, also I just want to call attention to the model work in this movie, which is again something we don't see as much anymore. We don't see little miniature models on these small sets, although a lot of Hoth was filmed on location in Norway, and we know that because we have two friends in the 501st, and in March of 2020, was it late February or early March? I think it was early March.
It was pre-pandemic in any case.
Oh no, it was barely pre-pandemic because it was right as stuff was ramping up. Went to Norway for a big global meetup at the place in Norway where Hoth was filmed. It also led to them hotels being closed, so they're like, oh, we got to do this as a day round trip. We can't stay at a hotel anymore. And again, also came out in 1980, the same year as The Shining, although definitely had a warmer reaction both critically and financially than The Shining. Although now both movies are fairly beloved. And now to finish up this movie, I wanted to go back to the classics, to a film that last year celebrated its 100th birthday. And that is the film Nanook of the North. And it's a very groundbreaking movie for a number of reasons. It was it's documentary, a feature-length documentary, and it's more of an ethnographic study of an Inuit man who was called Nanook for the film. His actual name is, again, hope I'm not butchering this, Alakarialak. And for a lot of people seeing this movie, especially in the 1920s when a lot of indigenous people were still cordoned off on reservations and just being greatly marginalized and weren't really a part of public life so much. Actually, when this film came out, this was around the time, if you saw the Scorsese film Killers of the Flower Moon or read the book, that was happening around this time. So it's very interesting to watch this film that has a very reverent tone for the indigenous subject, while in reality, the white people in Oklahoma, or the white people in a town in Oklahoma, were trying to steal the wealth of the indigenous people that lived there. So, an interesting thing to think about. But this film has a complicated legacy, because if we look at it in the context, if we just look at it now, it seems fairly stereotypical and finding out that Alakarialak, he didn't fight, he knew how to use guns. He used a lot of modern technology. He didn't die. Like there was the man who directed the film, Flattery. He told people that like, oh, Nanook and his family, they passed away of starvation. They got caught on an ice float. That is not the case. Alakarialak, he died of tuberculosis. So there was this whole mythos around him. So now the film is looked at as very hokey and almost offensively stereotypical in what what it portrays versus the reality of this man's life and his family's life. Actually, there's a woman who plays his wife in a movie who's not his actual wife. The director just thought, oh, she looked better. However, let's look at this in the context of 1922, when a lot of societal attitudes towards the indigenous are fairly negative, to put it delicately. This film has a very respectful and reverential tone towards the Inuit and towards Alakarialak. It sees it as he's just like, look at how there's almost the sense of, look at how ingenious this indigenous person is. They don't need technology. They know how to hunt. There's kind of this idea of he's more in touch with the land than we are. In the context of its time, it's incredibly respectful and reverent of the indigenous people. But again, knowing what we now know about the documentary, again, its legacy is a little bit more complicated. But I would still say it's worth watching. It's just, do not take this as a serious ethnographic film in any way, shape, or form. But it's also a very well-made documentary. It's thrilling. Again, he's not portrayed as a savage. He's portrayed as a man, a loving father. His wife is resourceful. His children are cute. And again, if you've seen even, or read editorials and books at the time of how a lot of people view the indigenous, this is a very flattering and kind portrayal compared to what a lot of people thought. And some people have said helped people, might have inspired people to change their minds a little bit of like, maybe I misjudged these people. But I definitely recommend watching it at least once. I think it's a fascinating film. And again, if we're all going to judge movies by today's standards, most films are not going to hold up to our standards. And it's also worth remembering 20, 30 years from now, films today may not hold up to those standards as well. So it is always worth looking at something in the context of the time they were made, rather than just dismissing it as like, oh, it's outdated, it's not worth watching. And with that, if anyone has any questions or any more questions or requests for recommendations, I know this program's a little horror heavy. That is where my favorite genre is. So, but again, I kind of found it to be, it's the final program of the year. It's a fun program, and join us next month. We're going to be talking about the year in cinema for 2023. Definitely an interesting year, with strikes, with Barbenheimer, with a lot of franchises just not doing as well as they should. In February, I'm going to be talking about Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis, who were a couple devoted to both art and activism, both on and off the screen. And in March, I'm going to be doing a film called The Beauty Behind the Brains, looking at women in old Hollywood who were smarter than, not they let on, but smarter than they were really allowed to be in many cases, or smarter than their public persona. Like, I think Lucille Ball is a fantastic example of someone who, her persona on television was a goofball, but behind the scenes, Lucille Ball was not someone to be messed with. She was an incredibly smart and shrewd businesswoman. And then there are more tragic examples like Marilyn Monroe, who was someone who had a very troubled upbringing, but really was a self-made woman and incredibly smart, but found that her looks and her persona limited her, sadly. But if no one has any questions, then I will hopefully see you all next month, and I hope you all have a great holiday. season and a happy new year.